Thanks to Blade HQ for making today's knife review awesomer.
It bears repeating and bears pointing out and emphasizing, because that's the mark of some seriously good knife design and attention to detail, I should say. Hello my friends, Late Boy Scout here with my review of the Spyderco Delica 4. This is the full flat ground version, the newest iteration of the knife, which is a classic Spyderco knife, by the way. It's been around a long time. 4 versions, obviously. The full flat ground version is basically like a 4.1. That's the way I would look at it. But it's pretty much the same classic knife that Spyderco has been putting out for a very long time, which tells me that it's an excellent knife. You know, if it's been this successful, if it's hung on for this long, if it's been selling this well for this long, man, that really says something about the quality of the design and about the quality of the manufacturer, I suppose. Spyderco makes some very good knives. In VG10 steel, a steel that I've got some good experience with. In this here, another Spyderco knife, the Centafonte 3. This one is hollow ground instead of flat ground, like the Delica. No different in steel though, and so I've got some good experience with VG10 steel, and I can tell you that it's a very good steel. It takes an excellent edge, and I really like its characteristics as I've gotten to know it. Now this particular knife, let's talk about this a little bit, but before we do that, I want to mention that during this review you're going to see a handful of other knives that I think stack up pretty well against the Delica, so stick around for that. It's going to be some fun to do some comparing a little later on. But let's talk about the Delica right now. It's got an awesome blade shape that comes in at, let's see, I think it's 2.875 inches altogether, with a cutting edge a little over 2.5. Not really a leaf shape from Spyderco this time, but you wouldn't really call it a drop point because of that amazing, taper. It's, I don't know, it's just one of Spyderco's sort of trademark knife shapes. Let's break out another Spyderco that is really not related in size or any other means, but the blade shape is somewhat similar. There's the Paramilitary 2, and you see that it shares a lot of characteristics in blade shape. Spyderco has got some very distinctive blade shapes that it uses, and you kind of know a Spyderco when you see one. We can also compare that pretty favorably to something like the Spyderco Persistence. It's got a little more of a belly going on there, but it's got that same sort of ramp with a big hole and a great big drop off. I also have a review out, or will have a review out, of this right here, the Spyderco Endura 4, not full flat ground, because this is the ZDP 189 version of the knife. Now this one is also, shares pretty much the same lineage as the Delica. Endura and Delica are very much related, clearly. They're basically just a Big Papa and Little Bear. And so, I mean, we share some of the same blade shapes, but the interesting thing about these two knives, the really interesting thing, is that they're not simply scaled up or scaled down versions of each other. Now, here's what I mean by that. Let's set these two aside for a second and try to examine some other blades that are perfectly scaled versions of one another. This is Boker, the Kalashnikov 74. All right, and this is a pretty cool knife, pretty fun one to play with. AUS 8 steel, great pocket clip, good ergonomics. I believe that's an aluminum handle, pretty much painted. I won't go into a lot of detail on it right now. Automatic knife, by the way. But this knife has a mini version of it, and I'll show that to you right now. Here's the black one, the black mini. All right, and these two knives are actual scaled versions of each other. Okay, so you can see that these little finger grooves here are just scaled down to this size. So you've actually, what this is, it means that this is kind of a knife for a smaller hand now. Whereas this fits my hand well. My fingers fit into those grooves just right. But when you scale that down in a constrained way, and that's what we've done here, you scale that down and now my fingers don't really fit in there, okay? All right, it's still a good knife. I still like it. But since they did that, since they basically just did a little constrained scale and, scaled the knife down without adjusting the design to still fit the same hand in the same way. Since they did that, then, I think it's kind of a downside. However, the Endura and Delica don't share that characteristic. They actually, instead of just simply scaling the knife down to create the Delica, scaling the Endura down, or vice versa, whatever you want to call it. Let's say they started with the Endura. Instead of just scaling the Endura down to create the Delica, they actually did the redesign that they needed to do to create a knife that still feels good in hand, still has a lot of the same feel and characteristics of the Endura, but, is designed for the same sized hand. Okay, so look at the blade shapes. While they harken back to one another and feel similar, they are not an identically scaled down version of the same blade. Even the holes are the same size. Okay, so you can plainly see that the vectors on this have changed. They feel related, but they're not the same. Also, this shoulder here, right here, shoulder's not the proper word for it, but in lieu of the proper word in my head right now, call this a little shoulder, you can see that those are rounded differently. Okay, then look at this initial finger choil here, which fairly well takes up 2 fingers, I'd say. Does a pretty good job of that. This one is actually about the exact same size. Let's just check that real quick. Pretty much it is. Okay, it's basically the same size. And then the next indentation, again, about the same size. So those two follow each other. And then what you've got here is, instead of this continuing on down, it gets kind of cut off right there. So what we're talking about here, and what I'm demonstrating to you here, showing you an example of, is some really, really good quality of design. They didn't simply just scale the knife down. I've said that like 5 or 6 times now, but it's true, and it bears repeating and bears pointing out and emphasizing, because that's the mark of some seriously good knife design and attention to detail, I should say. All right, so let's put the Enduro away. I think I've made that point pretty well, beating it into the ground pretty well. The Delica does stand on its own, really, though, even without sitting next to the Endura. It stands on its own as a great knife, carrying over a lot of the same features, including some jimping on the FRN as well as on this ramp right here that are all very effective. None here, and that's fine. This is just kind of a smooth area. Some of that bidirectional texturing, which when you push your thumb up this way, it pushes back, and when your thumb kind of pulls on it this way, it kind of pulls your thumb forward again. It's a very well designed handle scale made of FRN, and this particular one is in the brown color. It comes in several other colors, including, let's see, orange, I think green, blue. Go look on, Blade HQ's website or anywhere else you want to look, and you'll see all the different colors for that knife handle. A great selection of colors there. An excellent pocket clip, of course, just pretty much painted black, and you're going to expect some wear from that, just like you've seen here on this Endura. That will wear down eventually. Don't be too scared of that. I mean, don't let that bother you too much. It's just a characteristic of the design, and honestly, it gives a little character to your knife once that does start to wear down. It shows that you've been carrying it around and using it as you should. It is obviously a lockback with that David Boyd dent, or detent, whatever you want to call it. The Endura shares that. So a very just solidly built and well-designed knife. Also, we can look at some scales inside there. Not scales, sorry, liners that are actually drilled out, milled out. You can see little holes in there. Okay, those liners are milled out, and they are inset within that FRN handle scale. Again, that's a very nice touch, making it so that your hand never has to come into contact with that liner, and they actually use less material to make this the lightest weight knife they can possibly make it. And how lightweight is it? About 2.3 ounces for a Delica. Wow. Wow, great weight for an EDC knife. Excellent weight. So overall, you've got, I think the overall length here is, let's see, about 7 1/8. And in pocket, it's thin. It's going to be an excellent EDC knife. Not priced too badly, as we can get pretty spendy with everyday carry knives. This is not a cheap one by any means at $50 or $60, but it's an excellent one with excellent steel and so forth. So let's go into some of the other knives that kind of fall into the same category and also look really good up against this knife. So I've got a handful of knives I'm going to compare to the Delica 4. Let's start with the Spyderco Persistence, one of its brothers. Fares very well. I think as far as usability is concerned, the steel is not quite as good as VG10. It's 8CR13 MOV. And G10 handle scales, liner lock instead of the back lock, but a great knife nonetheless. How about the Kershaw Skyline? This in the rare flat dark earth, or I guess coyote tan, let's call it, and black blade. Whew, good looking knife, good looking knife. How about our Kershaw Leak? That's a standard, one I really love. And then of course we can't do an EDC knife comparison without bringing in a Benchmade mini-griptilian. How about, while we're at it, we bring in a K-Bar Dozier. That's the pink ribbon edition of the knife. And then just for kicks, since we got it handy, here's a Kershaw Zing. Now that is a rainbow of fruit flavors if I ever saw one. But it's also a great representation of some excellent EDC knives, none of which you can really go wrong in buying. But which one would you choose? And would you choose one of these over the Spyderco Delica? I don't know, man. Clearly, I chose all of them. But if you wanted to pick one of these, well, what you're looking at is probably 40-ish, 50-ish dollars, 20 plus, something plus, a little over 20, 80-ish, maybe 40 or so, another 40 or so, maybe 30, 35, and around 60. Varying steels, none of them are terrible. They're all pretty good steels. And it'd be really hard for me to say which one is the best. But since we're talking about the Spyderco Delica in this video, VG10, I want to re-emphasize, is a very good steel, and you really can't go wrong with that choice. In all, I think the Spyderco Delica 4 full flat ground and VG10 is just an excellent EDC blade, and you can't go wrong if you choose to buy this one and make it part of your collection or your singular everyday carry blade. Well, that's my review. Thank you very much for watching. I'm the Late Boy Scout, and I'll see you on the next one.